Claire, you want to see a picture of a guy with elephantitis of the nuts? It's pretty tasty.
No, thank you.
How do you think he rides a bike? Oh, Claire, would you ever consider dating a guy like this?
Can't you just leave me alone?
I mean, if he had a great personality, was a good dancer, and had a cool car. Although you'd probably have to ride in the back seat because his nuts would ride shotgun.
That's right. It is February. See, I've been saying the name of this month wrong for 40 years. And only a few years ago did I start saying it correctly. I used to always say February, but it's actually February. So now I'm trying to train my brain to say it the correct way all the time. But it's very difficult. So I apologize for all the annoying ways I'm going to say February this episode. But it's February 2025, which means we're going to be talking about February 1985. Interesting tidbit about February 1985 that I recently learned. David Bowie became the first major artist to convert all of their discography to CD. Now, to me, that seems really early on because I don't even think I really knew what a CD was in 85. I was still getting records and cassettes. I didn't get a CD player until 1992. Maybe Christmas 91 is when I got that. I think at this point, CD players were like the rich folk. They had the CD players. Maybe I'm wrong, but seemed like that to me. But either way, they could all now own every David Bowie album up until 1985. And maybe they even bought the albums that we're going to be talking about in this episode, like the albums that these two singles came from, because we're going to be talking about the number one singles in America for February 1985. For the first 2 weeks of February 1985, I said it's so good that time. Why can't I do that every time? For the first 2 weeks, the number one song was by Foreigner. For 2 weeks, that was the number one song. I think I remember hearing that one on the radio quite a bit when I was a kid. And then another song that I absolutely heard a shitload on the radio for the next 2 weeks of February 1985. The number one song in the country was I'm Never Gonna Dance Again. Blah, blah, blah. Careless Whisper by Wham! And featuring George Michael, which is a weird thing that I discovered. Like, if you look at the artwork, it just says George Michael. And apparently, I guess that was the American version. And then I think overseas it was Wham! Featuring George Michael. So apparently the record label was already getting ready for him to separate from that shit. But, I mean, really, like what do you listen to Wham! For? It's for George Michael. That's why. But either way, number one in the country for the last 2 weeks of February, Careless Whisper. Now moving on to the number one albums in the country. For the first week, a holdover from last month, the number one album was Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. But for the rest of the month, the number one album in the country belonged to this lovely lady right here behind me. The number one album in the country was Like a Virgin by Madonna. And then I'm just going to put her right back over here. Yeah. That way, you don't have to look at my stupid face the whole time. You can just look at Madonna the whole episode. Well, until I change that out. Sorry, folks. All right, so as usual, now we're moving over to the number one movies in the country for February 1985. Sorry, we already talked about this movie last month. All fucking month long, the number one movie in America is Beverly Hills Cop. And well-deserved, because I talked a lot about it last time. I love that movie. You heard me talk about it enough, so we can move on. But we're not moving away from movies just yet, because a big motherfucker for the 80s came out in February of 1985. Some may consider it one of the best movies of the 80s. That's right, The Breakfast Club. Came out on February 15th, 1985, and while it wasn't the number one movie in America, it was the number 3, which is, not too bad. And when all was said and done, it ended up making over $51 million worldwide, and it was only made for $1 million. So that's a fucking success if you ask me. And the cultural impact of this movie cannot be denied. Around that time, especially going into the 90s and beyond, I feel like if you're a teenager, this is a movie that you kind of have to see. And I didn't see it in 85. I saw it a few years later, and some of you may know what I'm talking about, when all of a sudden it popped up on regular TV, like network TV, and all the bad words were overdubbed. And all I remember was it was really odd that they couldn't say shorts. So it's that part where Bender's all, eat my shorts. And in the TV version, for some reason, they changed it to eat my socks. And I remember as a kid being like, wait, shorts is a bad word now? But anyway, I saw it and I loved it immediately. And then I saw the real version, soon after. And it's been a movie that I've loved ever since. I watched it actually a few years ago, and I think it's held up remarkably well. There's some stuff that's very 80s and more appropriate for that time. But overall, as a movie, I think it's pretty unfuckwithable. But, that's just my opinion, of course. And it had a pretty fun soundtrack, too. On February 19th, the soundtrack for The Breakfast Club was released. Sorry, Madonna. You're going to have to go over here for right now. I'll see you later. And then put the Breakfast Club right up there. A great soundtrack, but, the star of the show is Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. That is also like a quintessential 80s song. And so, I don't know. Beverly Hills Cop may have been the bigger movie at the time, but I think we know who won in the end. All right, moving on to the album releases of February 1985. So this first one, I was seeing a lot of posts this last month in January saying that this album was released in January of 1985, but the date I got was February 18th, 1985, and you go to this gentleman's website, and so far they have not posted anything about the anniversary for this album. So I'm going to stick that it came out in February of 1985. No Jacket Required by Phil Collins. Sorry, Breakfast Club, I'm going to take you to... This is going to be a bit now. I put this shelf up here. Now it's going to be a bit every episode. Me putting up fucking records. Sorry, guys. It's going to be my thing from now on. How fun is that? Okay, sorry. On to the album, No Jacket Required. The third solo album from Phil Collins, and the one where he massively blew up as a solo artist. Because he had, minor hits on the first 2 albums. I mean, if you have to remember, In the Air Tonight was a hit, but it didn't become a huge thing until years later. Whereas Sussudio immediately hit. And there were several other hits as well, but I just think it's an amazing album. And I love Phil Collins. Those of you who watch and look at a lot of my social type stuff, you know that I'm a big fan of Phil Collins. And this is not my favorite Phil Collins album, but it is a damn good one. And one of the best albums of the 80s, really. But on February 25th, 1985, when it comes to the pop-ish world, top 40 music, mainstream music, I'm going to go on record and say I believe this is the best album of the 80s in that arena. Songs from the Big Chair by Tears for Fears. All right, Phil, time for you to come down. Time for Tears for Fears. Roll into Orzabal and that other guy. I usually remember his name, but right now it's not happening. Kurt Smith. Ha! I did it. Anyway, I absolutely adore this album. I love Tears for Fears, but this album, it's one of those albums to me where it's got the hits that are really big 80s songs that everybody knows. But as an album, it's just really fucking good. Every song on the album is good, and it's like a little journey, and it's all the little different songs and styles that are in there. It is fucking amazing. I'm probably preaching to the choir because I feel like if you give 2 shits about something like this, you already know this album and you already love this album. So, came out February 1985, Songs from the Big Chair. And just a couple days later, on February 27th, a very important EP in the world of thrash metal, according to me, Armed and Dangerous from Anthrax. All right, sorry, Roland and Kurt, we got to put you down here. Now we got to put Danny and Charlie and Joey and Scott and Frankie up on the wall. So it was the first EP, the first recorded music with Joey Belladonna on vocals with Anthrax, kind of giving a little bit of taste of where they were going to go for their upcoming album, Spreading the Disease. And it's a really enjoyable EP. And, there's always that debate over the Joey Belladonna era or the John Bush era or the Neil Turbin era, the short-lived era. Honestly, I love all three, but the Joey Belladonna era was when I discovered them, so it's always a special thing for me, and this was the beginning of that era. Anthrax, Armed and Dangerous. All right, so that pretty much wraps up February 1985. Hold on before we go. Sorry, guys. Let's get Mads back up there for the end of the show. So, that wraps up February 1985. But now, let's jump forward 10 years. All right, so February 1995. So I'm just going to talk about a few albums that came out in this month in 1995, and it gives you a very good idea of the kind of shit I was listening to when I was 17. I would have been turning 17. Shit. Anyway, on February 1st, 1995, the first full length from Good Riddance, For God and Country on Fat Records. Great band, Good Riddance. If you're into that kind of shit, well, that's all we got here. So we're gonna keep moving. On February 15th, the third full-length album from No Use for a Name, Leche con Carne, which sounds kind of gross, I guess. But I'd say this is one of the quintessential albums of this era of the Fat Records punk kind of thing. One of them. It's a great fucking album. Great band. Rest in peace, Tony Sly. But yeah, this one came out on February 17th, 1995. The debut full-length album from Blink-182, Cheshire Cat. Originally, it was just Blink. In fact, I was introduced to this band through a compilation called Punk Sucks that also came out in 1995, and their song M&M's was on there, and so I went and got this album, and I've pretty much been a Blink fan aside from a few albums ever since. So it all begins right here, Blink-182, Cheshire Cat. And finally, on February 28th, 1995, this was a big one for me. Big choice from Face to Face, the second full-length album from Face to Face, and my favorite Face to Face album, really. I ended up seeing them on this tour shortly after and several times after that. Great live band, still around today. And but yeah, this is a special one. This is one that I listened to a fuckload. I know every word to this album still. So 1995, February, brought us this motherfucker right here, which I love with all my heart. All right, so that's it. That's all I got to talk about from 1995. Like I've said many times, there's not a lot that comes up that I really want to talk about that I'm excited about from 1995. But as usual, if there's anything that you're into that I didn't talk about, just put it in the comments below. Same thing with 1985, because I'm not going to cover everything, but that's where you come in and we have a conversation about shit. But yep, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 40 Years Ago this month, and we've got most of the year to go. So I hope you're ready. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you all again next month.